In between, keeping a watchful eye on us all, Mother was settling down in her own way. The house was redolent with the scent of herbs and the sharp tang of garlic and onions, and the kitchen was full of a bubbling selection of pots, among which she moved, spectacles askew, muttering to herself. On the table was a tottering pile of books, which she consulted from time to time, when she could drag herself away from the kitchen. She would drift happily about the garden, reluctantly pruning and cutting, enthusiastically weeding and planting. For myself, the garden held sufficient interest. Together, Roger and I learned some surprising things. Roger, for example, found that it was unwise to smell hornets, that the peasant dogs ran screaming if he glanced at them through the gate, and that the chickens that leapt suddenly from the fuchsia hedge, squawking wildly as they fled, were unlawful prey, however desirable. This Doll's House garden was a magic land, a forest of flowers, through which roamed creatures I had never seen before. Among the thick, silky petals of each rose bloom lived tiny, crab-like spiders that scuttled sideways when disturbed. Their small, translucent bodies were coloured to match the flowers they inhabited: pink, ivory, wine red, or buttery yellow. On the rose stems, encrusted with green flies, ladybirds moved like newly painted toys. Ladybirds pale red with large black spots, ladybirds apple red with brown spots, ladybirds orange with grey and black freckles. Rotund and amiable, they prowled and fed amongst the anemic flocks of green fly. Carpenter bees, like furry electric blue bears, zigzagged among the flowers, growling fatly and busily. Hummingbirds, hawk moths, sleek and neat, whipped up and down the paths with a fussy efficiency, pausing occasionally on speed misty wings to lower a long, slender proboscis into a bloom. Among the white cobbles, large black ants staggered and gesticulated in groups round strange trophies, a dead caterpillar, a piece of rose petal, or dried grass head, fat with seeds. As an accompaniment to all this activity, there came from the olive groves outside the fuchsia hedge the incessant shimmering cries of the cicadas. If the curious blurring heat haze produced a sound, it would be exactly the strange chiming cries of these insects. At first I was so bewildered by this profusion of life on our very doorstep that I could only move about the garden in a daze, watching now this creature, now that, constantly having my attention distracted by the flights of brilliant butterflies that drifted over the hedge. Gradually, as I became more used to the bustle of insect life among the flowers, I found I could concentrate more. I would spend hours squatting on my heels or lying on my stomach, watching the private lives of the creatures around me, while Roger sat nearby, a look of resignation on his face. In this way, I learned a lot of fascinating things. I found that the little crab spiders could change colour just as successfully as any chameleon. Take a spider from a wine-red rose where he had been sitting like a bead of coral, and place him in the depths of a cool white rose. If he stayed there, and most of them did, you would see his colour gradually ebb away, as though the change had given him anemia, until some 2 days later he would be crouching among the white petals like a pearl. I discovered that in the dry leaves under the fuchsia hedge lived another type of spider, a fierce little huntsman with the cunning and ferocity of a tiger. He would stalk about his continent of leaves, eyes glistening in the sun, pausing now and then to raise himself up on his hairy legs to peer about. If he saw a fly settle to enjoy a sun bath, he would freeze. Then, as slowly as a leaf growing, he would move forward imperceptibly, edging nearer and nearer, pausing occasionally to fasten his lifeline of silk to the surface of the leaves. Then, when close enough, the huntsman would pause, his legs shift minutely as he got good purchase, and then he would leap, legs spread out in a hairy embrace, straight on to the dreaming fly. Never did I see one of these little spiders miss its kill once it had manoeuvred into the right position. All these discoveries filled me with a tremendous delight, so that they had to be shared, and I would burst suddenly into the house and startle the family with the news that the strange spiky black caterpillars on the roses were not caterpillars at all, but the young of ladybirds, or with the equally astonishing news that lacewing flies laid eggs on stilts. This last miracle I was lucky enough to witness. I found a lacewing fly on the roses and watched her as she climbed about the leaves, admiring her beautiful fragile wings like green glass, and her enormous liquid gold eyes. Presently she stopped on the surface of a rose leaf and lowered the tip of her abdomen. She remained like that for a moment, and then raised her tail, and from it, to my astonishment, rose a slender thread, like a pale hair. Then, on the very tip of this stalk, appeared the egg. The female had a rest, and then repeated the performance until the surface of the rose leaf looked as though it was covered with a forest of tiny club moss. The laying over, the female ripped her antennae briefly and flew off in a mist of green gauze wings. Perhaps the most exciting discovery I made in this multicoloured lilliput to which I had access was an earwig's nest. I had long wanted to find one, and had searched everywhere without success, so the joy of stumbling upon one unexpectedly was overwhelming, like suddenly being given a wonderful present. I moved a piece of bark, and there, beneath it, was the nursery, a small hollow in the earth that the insect must have burrowed out for herself. She squatted in the middle of it, shielding underneath her few white eggs. She crouched over them like a hen, and did not move when the flood of sunlight struck her as I lifted the bark. I could not count the eggs, but there did not seem to be many, so I presumed that she had not yet laid her full complement. Tenderly I replaced her lid of bark. From that moment I guarded the nest jealously. I erected a protecting wall of rocks around it. As an additional precaution, I wrote out a notice in red ink and stuck it on a pole nearby as a warning to the family. The notice read, "Beware, earwig nest, quite please." It was only remarkable in that the two correctly spelt words were biological ones. Every hour or so I would subject the mother earwig to 10 minutes close scrutiny. I dare not examine her more often for fear she might desert her nest. Eventually, the pile of eggs beneath her grew, and she seemed to have become accustomed to my lifting off her bark roof. I decided that she had begun to recognize me from the friendly way she waggled her antennae. To my acute disappointment, after all my efforts and constant sentry duty, the babies hatched out during the night. I felt that after all I had done, the female might have held up the hatching until I was there to witness it. However, there they were, a fine brood of young earwigs, minute, frail, looking as though they had been carved out of ivory. They moved gently under their mother's body, walking between her legs, the more venturesome, even climbing onto her pincers. It was a heart-warming sight. The next day, the nursery was empty. My wonderful family had scattered over the garden. I saw one of the babies some time later. He was bigger, of course, browner and stronger, but I recognized him immediately. He was curled up in a maze of rose petals, having a sleep, and when I disturbed him, he merely raised his pincers irritably over his back. I would have liked to think that it was a salute, a cheerful greeting, but honesty compelled me to admit that it was nothing more than an earwig's warning to a potential enemy. Still, I excused him. After all, he had been a very young earwig when I last saw him. Thank you very much for listening. Please leave a comment below. Sleep well.